In the 70s, and that's the previous century, Bruce and I lived together with our young families in a community of people, a spiritual community, where meditation was the primary activity. We like to call the place the ashram. It was affiliated with a teacher that both Bruce and I had encountered, and that is Swami Rudraనంda Rudi, as he's known, who died shortly after I met him. Bruce had known him for several years. In that community, we probably did meditation work for 15 to 30 hours a week. Every day, 7 days a week, at least 2 hours, 2 sessions. From that time through today, Bruce has taught meditation, practiced spiritual work, and befriended perhaps thousands of people like me on personal one-to-one basis. Bruce teaches out of his home. He opens his home to people who truly are sincere about their work, which to me is remarkable, given what I'm going to tell you in just a minute. While doing all this work for all these years, and Bruce has managed to write, produce, and direct some of Hollywood's most truly remarkable movies. And he's become really known to millions of people, not only as an Academy Award-winning screenwriter of movies like Ghost and Jacob's Ladder and My Life and currently playing Traveler's Wife, but there have been all kinds of reviews I've read. Those are at least my friends. I read everything I can, who have linked Bruce to, spiritual themes that are very subtle in his movies, or they're very apparent, but people from all walks of life have commented about that. That Bruce manages in such a beautifully artistic way to weave spiritual themes into his movies. In particular, the movie Ghost, which he won the Academy Award for. I know people who have watched that movie 15 times and still come out feeling something remarkable about themselves, about their response to the movie. And, I think that's a really unique characteristic. There's a certain Zen master behind those movies, not just a Zen master who's teaching people like me on a regular daily basis. And Hollywood's a pretty high-maintenance place. I can't always get in touch with Bruce. There's a lot of very high-maintenance people in Hollywood, and I only say that because it's really remarkable that Bruce has come to be with us here. He has an incredibly tight schedule, but out of his friendship and out of his kindness and out of his this remarkableness, I'm just blown away that he's agreed to be here and be with us today. So thank you very much, Bruce.
I'll leave it here. If you can't hear me, tell me. I didn't come here out of the kindness of my heart. I actually thought I was coming here to be an attendee. Marty told me about this, and I was very happy to attend. I think I'm feeling like I think everyone else here, enormously privileged to be in this assembly of people. This is a rare gathering, and I don't know how many of us. I think everyone must appreciate the grace of our being here together at this moment, and the gratitude that goes along with it. I came because I love Bart. Larry's being here was an incredibly big inducement. I wanted to be with them. And Bart asked me then to present, and I felt in many ways unqualified to be a presenter. But that never stops me from taking on the role. So I decided I would talk today about what they put on the program, really, which is, I think, film and spirituality. And it has a lot of relevance to everything that we're talking about. I will tell you up front, I am not an enlightened master, so I can't speak to the levels of depth and refinement of our previous speakers, who I think have been extraordinary. And I'm just grateful to be able to listen to them. And I think we all are. I have a lot of years of spiritual practice, and my own awareness, if you will, has grown in a very natural, slow, human progression, like what's called growing and growth and being human. And what comes with that, I think, for anyone who's paying attention, is a kind of wisdom. And I feel I've been lucky to have acquired some of that. And I have a strong urge in my writing to share that with an audience. I understand the privilege of getting what I call 2 hours to speak to the world. It's an amazing opportunity that people get, and I've been given that a fair number of times. And sometimes I've done it effectively, sometimes not. Sometimes I'm to blame, sometimes I'm not. But I have made movies that I feel mostly proud of, and I'm still doing it, which is unusual in my career. People my age don't tend to still be working in Hollywood. It's an enormously ageist environment. I'm not sure totally how I'm actually doing it, other than the fact, I shouldn't tell you this, but that my agent married my niece recently, and I'm now his uncle. So he's keeping me working, which is great. But let me talk about the subject at hand, and I'm going to talk a little bit about myself as well. The reason we're all here, and I mean here in the world, and stuck, if you will, in the world, because a lot of people have been asking that today, is because we all want to know what happens on the next page. We all want to know what happens next. We are completely and overwhelmingly addicted to story. We love story, and so I think does God, or whatever that force is which made all of these stories. Each of us are living one of them. And each of us are completely and absolutely compelled by our own story, and equally compelled by other people's stories, because stories talk to us. Stories are a kind of opportunity for most men and women on the planet to experience transcendence of their own limited story. By hearing someone else's story, you rise a little bit out of you, and you get to see the world through somebody else's eyes, nose, ears. You start to really feel, if it's a good writer, what it means to be other than you. And that's a very valuable and exciting thing to have happen in your life. And great theater, great novels, great movies, if there are any, they really speak to this incredible kind of energized drama that carries us on a journey. And every movie is a journey. And every movie has a beginning, middle, and an end. And every character, every main character in a movie has what's called an arc. And an arc means that a character starts out in a stable position, an equilibrium of sorts. Somewhere around page 19 in the script, something comes to blow up that equilibrium. Somewhere around page 40, they have to figure out, what do I do about this? Page 40 to page 90, they are pretty much in a state of conflict and resolution, trying to figure out, what do I do? How do I find out what's going on in my life? I'm in deep trouble. Things are happening I don't understand. I need resolution. Somewhere then you enter into the final plan, which is the last act, page 90 to page 120. Somewhere around page 100 to 110, you lose complete control and have no idea what you're going to do or how it's going to end, and something happens. Something happens that informs you. Something from deep inside comes up. Something from outside. You know, the Lion King, the father comes through and helps him understand that he's a lion, and he's now king of the jungle, and he can do the thing he has to do. At the end of every movie, something remarkable takes place, and a character changes, and a character grows, and they go from equilibrium to total destabilization to horrible drama to a new level of equilibrium. It's usually like this, to another place of equilibrium that, as we all know, because we're all human, is going to get destabilized again. Because it'll happen to the end. We're all on that ride. Every one of us is people. So, having told you that, let me tell you my journey and how it worked in terms of what we're doing here, and then a little bit more about filmmaking as it applies to trying to share the messages that we're talking about in this room with a broader audience. My journey, my spiritual journey, really started at the age of 5, although I was unaware of it, in a sandbox, playing with my cousin Wendy, and playing with stuff in a big field. And all of a sudden, I was aware in the middle of the day that the sky had become completely black, and that there were all of these thousands of like wheels spinning around in the sky, pretty Ezekiel-like. I've seen pictures now of galaxies, so I now know that's what they were. But I had no top of my head. There was no head. There was just, that was my head. The universe was my head. And it was somehow all there, and I'm playing in the sandbox. And I remember going, that's all I did. It's really weird, really weird. It took me about 40 or 50 years to realize that I'd actually had some kind of an experience that probably meant something, especially after I started hearing about Harding and headlessness. But nothing much happened again until the mid-60s, and a very dear friend of mine was a friend of Tim Leary's. And I used to go up to Millbrook all the time, where Tim was doing sort of experiments with the drug LSD. And this friend of mine had offered to let me try some. I wasn't quite willing to commit to going up to Millbrook, but I was willing to try this new drug. It was the kind of drug that at that moment in time, you have to understand, it was still very new in the game. Life magazine did articles about it with Cary Grant and his experiences with LSD. So it had a kind of, it was okay. It hadn't been demonized yet. And Barry gave me a pill about so big, 650 micrograms, which was really a heavy dose. And he said, you know, keep it in your wallet, and the right night you'll take it. Well, the right night came. This was going to be the night. I had some Buddha pictures on my wall. I read the Tibetan Book of the Dead by Tim Leary and Ralph Messner and Richard Alpert, Baba Ram Das. And I took the pill, and nothing happened. Well, it just so happened on that day, fortuitously or not, Michael Hollingshead, the guy who would bring Tim Leary his acid from Osley Labs in Switzerland, had arrived in New York with a bottle to take upstate to Tim so he could use it for all of his experiments. It was about so big. And I always tell people, if we had put this in the water supply of New York City, none of us would be sitting here today. The world would be a completely different world. But my friend Barry, when he realized that the LSD wasn't working, said, well, I got an eyedropper, let me just get a little drop for you. So he goes and he goes to the LSD, this pure, absolutely pure Osley LSD. And he fills the eyedropper, but he goes to give me like a drop, and he goes, oops! I cannot tell you how many thousands of micrograms went shooting down my throat instantaneously. And I just went, well, okay. I mean, there's nothing else to do. I mean, you've been impregnated in some way that is going to have a big effect. And I sat there, and then it started to happen. I won't go into the whole thing because it took about 3.5 billion years. But it started with the ceiling going like this, and I found it very interesting. And then it pulled apart, and there was this big, vast volcano, and all of these creatures marching around it, mostly upended like human beings with human clothes. And I looked at it as kind of interesting, and then they started to become interested in me. And then I thought, oh, I'm going to be sacrificed. And this volcano, and I did not like that at all. And then one of them, which was a walking, talking alligator, started with a coat, started coming out of the ceiling to get me, and I freaked out. And from that moment on, it was what's called a bad trip. It didn't stay a bad trip. The first 2 billion years were pretty bad. The last billion were interesting. The beginning part, the only way to describe it is if you've ever seen The Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch, one of the most frightening paintings ever of hell in this world. It's exactly what it was like. I was literally being taken apart, only in this case, cell by cell. Literally every cell of my body had a kind of memory in it. And that memory was both human and it was not human. It was part of it was sort of reptilian, if you will. Some of it was insect-like. It was incredibly dense, and it started unraveling in a kind of DNA-like code that kind of spooled up into something I could not see or understand. But it was devouring me. In my idea, it was being devoured. What it was really doing, it was taking back information that I had in my life, gathered through my life, that it wanted. And it was very Matrix-like. It was just going up. And I was not happy, because everything I was being dismantled. And I didn't want to be dismantled. I was pretty traumatized, really, by this. And I tried everything I could to hold on to being Bruce, and being physical, and being in my body. And I would close my eyes and try to imagine this isn't really happening, but it made no difference. Eyes closed, eyes opened, I was in this hellish situation. They started taking me down these stairs into a place called hell. And I said, I'm too young to die. And they said, well, that's what everybody says. And I kept going down, and it literally had that kind of had like a neon sign about "Give up hope, all ye who enter here." It was just like that. It was like just awful. It was awful. And I don't know how. At one point, I ended up outside, wanting to make a phone call to my parents. I just had to call them just to make sure that I was okay and they were there and everything was real. And then I completely understood that New York City stopped a block away, that there was no such thing. My parents were supposed to be in Detroit. I realized there's no such thing as Detroit. There's no such thing as my parents. None of that exists. Nothing exists. It's all completely here. That I had invented the whole world. And then I started to dissemble that. And I go, so does that mean I created Shakespeare? Yes. Was I Socrates? Yes. Am I hell? Yes. I was everything. And it was not information I wanted. It was not information I was prepared for. I really wished it wasn't happening, but there was nothing much to do about it. I ended back in my bed. My roommate who was guiding me through this was now in a state of total trauma, because he had never seen anybody kind of going through what I was going through at that level. And I just laid down on the bed, and then, again, the universe started to deconstruct itself in so many ways, and it's so visually fascinating, but ultimately, every galaxy, every planet, everything that was all here, and it was all finding its way into something I started calling mothership. The mothership wanted this information, and I watched the world go through all of its permutations, and again, it took a very, very long time until it got to a point where time ceased to exist. There was no such thing as time, and then there was no such thing as space. The universe and atom were at that moment the exact same thing to me. I couldn't, because there was no relativity. There was no size to anything. It was completely infinitely large and completely infinitely small at the same time. And then, again, I don't know how I can go through all the steps, but mostly I came to nothingness. It was just complete stillness. And kind of awe in that stillness. And there was nothing that I wanted, needed. I finally understood I was dead. There was no I left anymore. There was no me. There was just nothing. But it was a nothing that was very full. It was very complete. And that was that. And done. Except then I felt something go plop, like something dropped into a lake. Like it was like I had been impregnated. Something went plop, and then this thing that I was, and I didn't know what I was, but whatever it was, it divided into 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. It started dividing so fast, and I'm not watching it because I had no eyes yet, but I am experiencing this complete reconstruction of something, and then I realized my body is being reconstructed, the room I had been in is being reconstructed, the city of New York, the world, sun, universe, all going back. And there I was. And I just looked around this room, trying to figure out why the hell did I come down? And then I just started to laugh. And I laughed, the biggest laugh I have ever had in my life, this roaring bear-like laugh. Interesting that it was a bear at that point. And it was huge, and I just roared with happiness. And I was back, and I said, why am I back? Why am I back? I couldn't figure it out. And something came into me at that moment, and it said to tell stories about what you just experienced. So I didn't know how to tell stories, and I also didn't know what I had experienced. I had no idea. So my dear friend Barry brought me a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. I'd never read the Bhagavad Gita. And he gave it to me to look at. This is a day or so later, and I'm reading it, and I'm going, oh, everything that would have been a total abstraction to me 48 hours before was completely knowable. Completely. I'd just been there. And I'm reading it like, there are people talking about this kind of experience. I was amazed by that. And then I found a book called The Perennial Philosophy by Aldous Huxley, which is this wonderful book that talks about the mystical core of every religion and the thing that binds all these religions together. And I went, aha, it's all one thing. And everybody interprets it differently. And so that was all very important information to me. And I also had, because I used the Tibetan Book of the Dead to sort of guide myself through this, although I was so far gone I didn't understand a word they were saying to me. But the idea that the Tibetans knew about this was important. And I said, I have to go to Tibet. I have to get teaching, training, somebody. So I was working at NBC at the time, and as a film editor, and I started trying to convert everybody at NBC into this new world of LSD, because I thought I was partly going to save the world. I figured this was a sacramental experience. Everybody should be doing LSD. They didn't agree with me. There was a radio program downstairs. They said, if you go on that program, don't use your real name. And I said, okay. And I went on and used Barry's name. And I went and I talked to everybody thinking I'm about to really start this big journey of helping everybody figure this out. And then some young kid killed his grandma in Brooklyn and blamed LSD, and that was the beginning of the end of the acceptance of that drug in the culture. It started to go downhill really fast, and I realized I had to just shut up about what had happened to me. And I then decided that I had to go to India. And so I quit my job at NBC, which was an amazing, I have so many stories, but quitting my job at NBC was, everybody wanted to quit their job at NBC, but I was the only one who did it. Everybody, I mean, I'm talking 40 editors and film and news department people took me out to this lunch, a room like this with this huge table. They're all sitting around celebrating the one guy who got out. And I left, and I moved to Greece. And I went to Greece because I had friends who were living there, and they had a house they were leaving on an island called Paros. I had my own donkey, my own goat, 3 cats, and a view of the Aegean. It was unbelievable. I had, at one point, a wonderful girlfriend, other friends. It was actually a delicious, delicious experience. And while I was there, I kept saying, I'm supposed to be in India or Tibet. So in September of that year, I sent everything I had back to America. And I wrote to my parents and said, I am leaving for, and I started listing all the places that I was planning to go through. My God, it was scary. I mean, Baghdad and, Afghanistan. I had a journey ahead of me that was really remarkable. And then I took off. And I began this overland journey to India, which was the thing that became the fundamental core of my sort of worldly experience at that time. And it was very instructive. And I began this long journey. It was a spectacular journey. I ended up living in a Tibetan monastery in Kathmandu for a while. Some of you probably have been there. It's Bodhanath. It's probably changed over the years, but it's a great Tibetan stupa outside of Kathmandu. I was looking for teachings, and I was looking for teachers. At one point I heard that His Holiness the Dalai Lama was going to America to talk to the UN, and I thought, that's not a good idea. They don't know how to deal with the Dalai Lama. I don't know why I thought that, but I thought someone's got to tell him that they don't know what Tibet is. They think of it as Shangri-La. They don't have a clue to what Tibetan Buddhism is. So I naively decided that I would go see the Dalai Lama and tell him what he should know about his trip to America. I mean, the level of hubris is unbelievable at that moment. But it's what I did. I went to northern India, and I went to the palace, actually, where the Dalai Lama is staying, and long adventures just to even get there. And I knocked on the palace gate and said, I need to talk to His Holiness. And they went, who are you? You have an appointment? Why are you here? I said, it's really important. I mean, I have things to say. And they said, he's a head of state. We're sorry. We just can't do this. And they wouldn't let me. And I just couldn't take no for an answer. So I heard that his sister was working at an orphanage in a place called Happy Valley, which I love the title Happy Valley. So I went to Happy Valley, and I introduced myself to her, and I said, I need to talk to your brother. Is there any way you can make this happen? And she just looked at me like I was crazy, but she did. She actually got me an audience with him 4 days later. And I went to see him. I was told I had a half-hour meeting. It ended up we had spent 3 hours together, and they were incredible. They were really wonderful. And all he wanted to talk about was Buddhism. He was so grateful to have somebody who was there talking about anything other than refugee problems. I knew the minute I spoke to him that he knew more about the world than I would ever know, and talking about the United Nations was absurd. So he just lectured me, basically, on Tibetan Buddhism, and we had this wonderful dialogue. And at the end, he offered to be my teacher. And I said, this is awkward. I don't think you're my teacher. I'm grateful for the invitation, but I need to continue my journey. Is it possible that you can let me finish my travels, and if I haven't found the teacher I'm looking for, you will let me come back? He said yes, that it was completely fine, and I really believe it was completely fine. And I did continue my journey, and the journey went through a lot of ashrams, a lot of people. I mean, I met the Maharishi before he was kind of the Maharishi. I just met so many people, and I ended up not finding anybody there. I went to Southeast Asia, I went to Japan, looking. Of course, it's this dumb cough looking. I mean, if you don't know what you're looking for, you can look and look and look, and you don't know. And I kept wondering, how does somebody like me know when you found somebody authentic? Well, what ended up happening is I got back to America completely bereft inside that I had failed in this enormous mission to find a teacher. But I had these Tibetan carpets that I was selling to help support the Tibetans I lived with in Nepal. And I took them to a shop which was 4 blocks from my old apartment in New York. And a cherubic guy named Rudy ran an Oriental art shop. And I took it into the shop, and he said, I'm not interested in those. He didn't want the carpets at all. And he said, I don't sell things like that. He said, what were you doing in India? And I said, well, I was kind of looking to find a teacher. And he said, did you find one? I said, no. He said, well, I can teach you everything you want to know. And it was really interesting because I knew instantly that it was true. I just knew he could teach me what I wanted to know. And he sat down and taught me a practice that was that day called Kundalini Yoga. I don't know, Kundalini Yoga has become such a sort of multifaceted sort of teaching in the West that I don't know that it would be defined as Kundalini Yoga, but it did involve a breathing practice of kind, not like Yogi Bhajan, I guess. It's a different practice. It involved energy transmission from teacher to student, and it was unbelievably potent. He would look at me, just look at me, and I would go, whoa, and I would fly on the floor, just lying on the floor. That, you can't deny that when that happens. It's so powerful. And I just knew I was in touch with some kind of energy. I mean, nowadays, you watch those Christian broadcasting and they touch people and they all fall down and people catch them. But it's not unlike that. But it was very, very powerful. And I became a devout student of Rudy's work and practice. And I became a teacher at one point of his practice. Rudy passed away 7 years after I met him in an airplane crash. But his teaching filled me, and I felt deeply to this day responsible as a teacher of what he taught me. Now, what has happened over the course of time is that the world has shifted. I grew, I changed. I kept doing this practice for a long time, and it was a very powerful practice. I'm going to teach it tomorrow morning to anybody who's curious to know what it is. I'll tell you its real value honestly, is for people with what I call distracted mind, because it really finds a way of collecting mind and turning it it makes it interiorizes it and uses the chakra system as a way of sort of focusing the energy, and it allows you to ultimately do the most important part of that class, which is to ask for help, to surrender, which is something we're all used to as a concept. And it shows you kind of how to do that in a way that is very sensible, tangible, real in yourself. But it's very aggressive in its asking and wanting something other. In other words, to take that which you are at this moment, which you think is of as imperfect, and make it more perfect, make it better. Well, what's happened to me in the past 10 years is the whole eruption of the Advaita kind of teaching. The idea that this is it. And I have really in myself embraced that very deeply. I took some seminars with Eckhart, and become interested in Adyashanti and all these various people. And then what took place was I got a copy of a movie sent to me by one of the people in this group, Sean Nevins, called Closer Than Close. And on it were a number of people in this room, including Bart. And I didn't really want to see it. People are always trying to send me things. And I usually say no, but although I've learned over the years saying no kind of is a waste of time, you get much more when you say yes. But what I did is I finally said, if you send it, I can't promise to look at it very quickly. But send it, and when I get a chance, I will look at it. Well, for whatever reason, the day it arrived, I looked at it immediately, and it changed my life on some level. And I'll tell you, it changed it in a very simple way. I always imagined that enlightened beings were a rarefied part of human experience, that they were in India and in Asia, that there were very few of them, they were celebrated, there were ashrams built around them and temples built around them. And suddenly I saw 3 guys who were just like guys who had been enlightened. And I could not deny what that meant, that maybe this is a much bigger thing, that maybe there are many people out there who have awakened, who are uncelebrated, if you will, who perhaps don't even know how to talk about what happened to them, because finding a language for it doesn't necessarily go along with the experience. Some people are born to teach, and some people are not born to teach. But I was very intrigued by it, and the next thing that happens is I get an email from Bart, who said, I've written a screenplay. And I said, oh shit, that's what happens when you get enlightened. You want to go to Hollywood. And it was really disturbing to me. It was like, all I wanted was to get out of Hollywood. And Bart suddenly wanted me to read his screenplay, and I said, okay. And I read his screenplay, and it was really well written. And it really drew on his experiences in Vietnam. And we started a dialogue, and I thought I couldn't do this dialogue without, in some ways, telling him who I was. So in many ways, I wrote him about all the experiences I've just told you. And we began a dialogue which has become one of the acts of grace in my life, because I get to talk to somebody who is as humble, you all know Bart, humble and gracious and real and authentic and easy. And because we share a screenwriting language as well, it's one of the great experiences of my life to have found somebody of this caliber willing to talk to me, and I consider it an unbelievable gift. So here I am, a Hollywood screenwriter who is pursuing a spiritual path, who has come to understand more than anything, and this has become the essential part of my own practice, that this is that, if you will, that my practice now more than anything is to be with what is, and not to think that in any way that it's wrong, that somehow I need to change it to something else. Now, I'm not meaning if I have a headache, I don't take an aspirin, but that basically finding in myself the muscular capacity to say yes to this moment over and over and over. I am not enlightened. I have not had the awakening that we've been privileged to hear about. But I have had, over the course of years, lots of proximities to that experience, enough that there's no doubt in me about what we've been hearing. I don't have anything in me that does battle with it or questions it. I do nothing but honor it. I think every description we've heard of people's awakening is inspiring and extraordinary, and there's a part of me that is very attracted to it, and I have to honestly say a part of me that doesn't care if it happens or doesn't happen. I have had a very interesting life. And this is important to me. Almost everything I've ever dreamed about in my entire life has come true. And that's an unusual thing. I got the career I wanted. I won an Oscar. I have a wonderful wife. I have wonderful children. I have made money. I have homes. I mean, I have all of these things. Now, I got to tell you, there's downsides to a lot of this, but you don't want to hear all of that at this point. But the real downside of everything coming true, literally, almost everything. I could have had more sex, but everything, everything coming true is that it doesn't satisfy. And I can tell you that not from speculation, not from thinking about it. I have all the stuff I could possibly want. My wife and I fight about which house we should live in because I think we should sell one. I want to simplify. She wants to simplify in New York. I want to simplify in California. There's no simplicity in my existence. Hollywood is not an easy place. I don't love the people I have to work with there. The process of trying to tell these stories in Hollywood is very difficult, and I'll talk about that in a second. I have arrived at a place in my life that has given me everything, and it's clearly not enough. Now, I really believe, and my teacher Rudy was very clear about this, he said, you can't surrender what you haven't had. Now, you may not buy that. I mean, there's arguments about it. But I really think, he said, if somebody has $10 in their pocket, they say, well, I don't need money, I can surrender money. And you have $1 million to surrender, or $100 million, it's a different story. Letting go of the thing you are really attached to, the thing you really have, is a much bigger muscular act than letting go of something you've never had. And I have to say, one of my main concerns spiritually, and here too, is that so many people I meet who are pursuing enlightenment, I think are doing it in a sense to not have to live their life, to not have to have a full life, in order to feel that they are somehow liberated from the need to love being here. And I think, I just because I've been hearing this a lot, I just want to argue, I think you can't let go of life until you love it, until you truly love it. And I think you can't let go of it until you really understand the miracle of it. And you may not want to let go of it exactly at that moment in time. But if you really, really love it, you will also start to recognize that it's not easy, that life is often brutal, often ugly, that the colors that go into making life are not all pink and yellow and orange. You know, there's a lot of very dark hues that go into human life, that it's not an easy experience for anybody, and that if you can start to go yes to the ugliness, and we've heard that here today, or the discomfort, or the not easy part of your life, you begin to have a kind of awakening. It may not be the grand awakening, which I think of as like, you know, an apple on a tree when it's just completely juicy. It goes, it just falls off. Why? Because it's full of juice. It's not because it's dry and because it's, you know, and feeling in this imperfect piece of fruit that just kind of decays on the vine. It falls off because it's complete, done, and there it is. That's an image I really care about, and so I share that with you because it's like one thing that wanted to get said today. But let me push all of this back into the Hollywood arena. How do you write movies about what we're talking about here? How do you write a movie about trying to be enlightened or liberated? Well, movies have at the very core of their storytelling aspect something called a rooting interest. A rooting interest is something you desperately want to have happen for your main character. Mostly it's not to get killed, and to get the girl. That's what you want. You want one or both of those things to occur, and you want it a lot. There's an enormous drive for those things to take place, and if you have enough rooting interest, these movies become very, very exciting for you. There's a dynamic to them that's really wonderful. And you don't have movies where you root for somebody to become enlightened. And I've never seen it. I've been very curious about how you could pull that off. And what you find out is that for an audience to wish for nothingness, ultimate nothingness, is not going to take place. So you have to find the metaphors in movies that speak to these very ideas. And so I always talk about, in groups where I have to give these kinds of talks, spiritual movies to me are best defined by a single movie, which is Casablanca. Most people don't think of Casablanca as a spiritual movie, and those of you who haven't seen it, owe yourself to see it. It's one of the great movies of all time. Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman, and Humphrey Bogart is in love with Ingrid Bergman. He has run away from their love, which has not manifested properly in Paris. Their relationship couldn't go on, and she ended up with the head of the resistance, the French resistance. He's gone to Casablanca in North Africa, and she arrives there with her husband. And they fall back in love again, but the world needs her and her husband more than Humphrey Bogart needs her. And she's willing to give up everything to stay with him, and he ends up giving up the love of his life for the world. That sacrifice, that nobility, that goodness in him is so profound that even though you didn't know you were rooting for that as an audience, even though you thought you were rooting for those lovers to be together, you realize at the end, what you really cared about was that he become this sacrificing good human being. And that's as close, I think, as we get to a kind of spiritual understanding, giving up your own private, personal, egoistic need for something much larger. And when you have that in your life, you have a taste of this journey that everybody in this room is on. I like Hollywood movies. I want to write movies that speak to an audience, that touch the spiritual chord. But it's very hard, because nobody in the business that I have met wants to do that. And so you are up against this thing repeatedly that says you have to remove the spiritual elements from the movie. And they have been sometimes literal. I did a movie called The Last Mimsy, and the director of the movie said, cut out the Buddhism. I don't want any Buddhism in this movie. So I had to literally lift out every reference to, every appearance of any Buddhist figures in the movie. And at one point, there were some real Tibetan monks and all these different characters that came into the movie, primarily because the movie is about these kids who discovered toys from the future. And I kept trying to figure out, well, where do toys from the future come from and how does that work? And I thought, well, in Tibetan culture, the Dalai Lama and other lamas are all picked in their reincarnated form with their toys. They are taken to a place as little children, once they've been acknowledged as the reincarnate, or possible reincarnate, and they're taken to a room where there are all these toys, their old toys from their previous life, and another group of toys. And if they pick out their old toys, they are the reincarnated being that they're looking for. So I used that for the story, and then I had real Tibetan monks and all of these people that would have, I think, made a very exciting movie. It was a big movie. And they literally took every one of these guys out of the movie. What was interesting, though, is as they removed everybody, the essential Buddhism of the movie couldn't be extracted. And they didn't even, as a director in the studio, know it was still there. It was really interesting. As long as we took out the figurines and the images of the Buddha, it was okay. And the film really has a very strong Buddhist aspect. Jacob's Ladder is the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Nobody knew that, but it's really the Bardo journey of a guy in the last hours of his life. He's just been bayoneted in Vietnam. The next thing he knows, he thinks he's in the United States with his wife, but in fact we realize at the end of the movie, sorry to ruin this for you who haven't seen it, but it's 20 years old, At the end of the movie, he realizes that he just died on the battlefield in Vietnam, and everything you've been watching was a projection of his mind in Bardo's state, going through his discovery process of why he died, or what happened to him, that he died, and that it allows him to have a liberated death. And I actually got to use Meister Eckhart in the telling, a great German mystic who says that if you're afraid of dying, you will see demons tearing you from your flesh, and if you are open to dying, it's angels freeing you from the earth. That line is a really important line, and it's a great theme for a movie. And that movie announces that. I consider that an amazing achievement. In a movie called My Life with Michael Keaton and Nicole Kidman that did no business at all, I spent 9 months in a state of pretty close to Dark Night of the Soul. It wasn't quite, but it was really. The movie failed at the box office, and I felt totally like a failure. Like I had done a movie that nobody wanted to see, and it was very painful. And I almost was like crawling on the ground with, the amount of pain that was causing me. And then I went to a bar mitzvah or a wedding, and this woman comes up to me, and she says, "I have to talk to you." I said, "Okay." And she said, "Can we go somewhere?" I said, "Sure." So we went aside somewhere, and she said, "I have to tell you a story." She said, "I had a husband who died of cancer 2 years ago, and I had an 11-year-old son who's now 13, and he and I have never been able to talk about the death of my husband. We could not bear this discussion." She said, "I am now in the last stages of terminal breast cancer, and I have 6 months to live, and I did not want to leave this world without a dialogue with my son." And she said, "I didn't know what to do. And then we went to see your movie. And in the movie, my son just started crying and crying. And we went home, and he crawled up into my lap. And we had the discussion that made it possible for me to leave this world. So I just want to thank you." And it was an amazing moment for me, for a million reasons. But one of them is that I knew why I had made the movie. I had made it for this woman. And it was absolutely fine. It was enough. And then about 2 months ago, I was giving a talk in LA with the last Mimsy about this little girl who sends a doll into the future to take DNA from the present into the future, where the human race has basically died out, or is dying out and needs an infusion of DNA, and it can only travel through time in this little machine they built, which is like a little rabbit. But it's something a little girl would have, and it gets the DNA from her tears. And the DNA goes into the rabbit, and it takes it, and she has to get it back to the future. Anyway, it's a sweet story. And I was giving a talk at the Writers Guild about writing movies that matter, because I wanted to bring other writers together to talk about these 2 hours that we all get to have this incredible audience. And 2 little girls were there. They were like 10 years old, but by themselves, no parents. It was like, this is weird. There's like 150 people sitting there, these 2 little girls in the front row. And we're talking, and then at some point we open it up for questions, and the little girl raises her hand, and I go, yes? And she goes, "Mr. Rubin, we've been talking about what the themes of movies are, and and how important it is to create a theme and have a theme." And she said, "What is the theme of The Last Mimsy?" I had no idea. I sat there going, "Oh my God, how am I going to answer this? The cameras are rolling, and there are all these people sitting there." And I'm really kind of like a yikes moment. And I said, "Well, honey, why don't you tell me what you think the theme is?" And she looked at me and she said, "I think the theme of The Last Mimsy is that even little girls can save the world." And everyone in the room went, "Oh!" I said, "That's exactly right."
So receptive.
And I was so grateful that she got it, but I was also grateful again that when you write, you don't know where it's going to go. You don't know who you're talking to. And that she came back with that, and that she felt empowered by that. I could feel enough empowerment to come to a meeting like this to meet the writer of a film that she clearly responded to. And it was an extraordinary, extraordinary thing. So I'm now trying to do another movie. Bart and I have been talking about it back and forth, and the director of the film has told me, and he's a major Hollywood director, he said, Bruce, your idea is too religioso. Religioso. You got to cut out all the religion stuff, all that, get it out of the movie. It was the whole point of the movie. But he's a major Hollywood director, and I had no choice. So I've spent the last month and a half trying to tell the same story without any of the theme that was originally in the movie, and trying to figure out how I could do it. I said, Bart, help me, please, because I was really so lost, and we went back and forth trying to figure out how can we do this? And we got close to it, but we couldn't get to it. We just couldn't find the last thing at all. And it was due 2 days ago, and I was pretty despairing, because this was failing at this point in my life is always unpleasant, and there's a lot of ego stuff in it. But it's not just the ego, but it's because it's about wanting to get things right. And I was teaching my meditation class, and I was working with a woman in the class who's a poet. And we were just sitting, it's an eyes open meditation, which is a really powerful thing. And we were sitting just working, deeply open, deeply sharing, and all of a sudden, the whole ending of the movie came flooding into me in the simplest of terms. Just went like that. I wasn't asking for it. I certainly wasn't asking her to deliver it at all. It just arrived. And it arrived in the nick of time, just before the last moment because I was going to have to turn in a terrible piece of, a terrible piece of writing, and she saved the movie. And actually, there was another woman in class who's a writer as well, and I worked with her. The last coda of the movie came, and it was there. It was done. And the grace, if you will, of writing, which arrives in so many different unexpected ways, is one of the great gifts of a worldly career that requires the universe to collaborate with you. Because nobody, when they write, knows where this stuff comes from. Nobody. I haven't got a clue. I don't know how it arrives. I don't know why it goes away. I don't know why some days it's there in profusion, and there are other days nothing is there at all. I've actually, a script like Jacob's Ladder it was like me taking dictation. I just, like that. And I usually I went, oh, it was horrible. It was so dark, And my wife once came in and I jumped because I was in this other world. And she said, what are you writing? And I said, I don't know. and it kind of wrote itself. But then I would write a film, and I would write, and nothing would come. I would just write, I would plod along, and all of my limitations as a human being would be on the page. And then I would get to the last scene and going, this is the worst thing I've ever written, but I carried it all the way through to the end, sort of like this last project. I carried it all the way through to the end, and as I start typing the last scene, grace. The whole ending came to me, which relocated the whole opening of the movie and completely redefined what the movie was about. And basically what they said to me, the universe, you do the work, we'll take care of you. But it was really, it's not for us to do it, it's for you to do it. And then there is a partnership between me and what is. But it does not allow me to escape the work. The work is essential in my writing practice, and it is essential in my spiritual practice. And what I do is I do everything I can, sometimes with great fallibility and great ineffectiveness, and then something happens. And about a year and a half ago, I had an operation at the Cedars-Sinai, and I ended up with a pulmonary embolism. And I was in like more pain than I'd ever experienced in my life. And so I started to do every breathing, spiritual, meditative technique I had ever heard of, trying to get away from the pain. I also tried to be in the pain, but this was not pain you can be in for very long. I didn't know what to do. I honestly had no clue how to get beyond this. And finally, I just said, I don't know what to do. I didn't even say I surrender or I give up. I just said, I don't know what to do. And at that moment, I was flooded, literally just flooded with love and embrace and comfort and the sense of being taken home. that I had not even known that I had given up, that I had given up because I didn't know what else to do. And I thought, this is the most amazing thing. I had nothing to do with this. It wasn't like I surrendered, it was like it surrendered me. And I was just totally released from all of the suffering that was going on. It's not an awakening as such, but it is a promise of something really profound to me. And that promise is a great ending for every story in this room, which is, at some point, we're all going to be in that place. There comes a moment where you just can't deal with the magnitude of what's happening. And what came to me in this moment was the sense that we are all unbelievably loved. And that at that moment, everyone has this moment of release and being taken into oneself. Whether you have an awakening moment or not, I really can't tell you, but you'll be happy. You know, and I was telling people earlier a line that Walt Whitman said that I think of as so powerful. He said, you know, death is other than what you think and luckier. And it's a wonderful line. And I think that so many of us run around with this endless fear of death. I think that learning through experience that there is this greatness in our lives that is in our lives all the time, and it is an embrace that we are all able to partake in and will take us in when it wants to. And that's been a great lesson for me. And I think we all want to hear stories in our lives. Every one of us has a story. Every one of us wants to read stories because of the joy of other people's adventures and their process of learning. What they've learned, something that we want to learn. It's easier to learn through other people's lives often than through our own. We want these stories in our lives. We want to know what happens next for everybody. Every time I think that I might be dying, I realize it's okay. It's okay. The only thing that holds me back is what's going to happen with the play I just wrote and with my son going to have a baby. Those are the two things. It's the what happens next. Once I let go of the play, which is pretty easy, it's just my son's baby. And then I can probably go, well, actually I did this. I said, it's going to be born. It's going to have a life. It's going to have struggles. It's going to have good times. It's going to love sex. It's going to have a journey, and it's going to die. That's what's going to happen. No mystery. It may get enlightened this lifetime. It may not. It may have beauty in its life. It may not. But I got that. And we all have that story, and the variabilities of the stories are important, but it's the same story. We all live the same story. And every one of us lives it with wonderful variation, but we all know where it's heading. Every one of us knows where it's heading. There are a few people, an unbelievable collection of them right now in this room, who get what the real ending is. And the real ending is a little bit like the ending of every fairy tale, that you live happily ever after. But you don't live happily ever after as you live happily ever after as what is. And that's the stories. And that's why I tell stories. That's why we go to movies to watch stories, read books, go to theater. It's why we're all assembled here. But waiting for the real ending is what we're doing in this room. And when you decide, I guess, that you're ready for the real ending, you make it possible for that ending to finally explain itself to you and give you what you've been looking for from the very beginning. And we're all on that journey, and this is the room of people who are moving toward the end. So with that, I'll take any questions you like about this process and about Hollywood if you want, and who's sleeping with who,
I just wanted to say is, you've come out with these movies over time, and for people like us, before I met the groupie, they were such an inspiration, because you would think, God, there's someone else out there that is thinking similar types of thoughts, and I think that it does a service that no book can ever touch.
Well, movies have a vast audience, and it's surprising how many people get touched by them. I don't do what Larry did. I don't go on the internet and look at the reviews because it's too painful. But every so often I hear that there are a lot of people out there talking about these things, that that it has a life, you know, and in some ways that can be a good thing. And if you write movies that are worth your while, hopefully they'll be worth somebody else's while, and you'll be happy you did it.
We may have even had a TAT or SKS group meeting where we watched Jacob's Ladder together.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I think we did.
That recommendation that was on Sean's site.
What's that?
I saw the Jacob's Ladder because it was on Sean Evans' site.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Huh.
And I was last Wednesday just having to browse. I didn't know you wrote both of them, so it's interesting that you happened to chance on another film that was
Yeah,
similar.
there's a certain, you'll see similarities if you ever watch the films. The one nobody knows about is My Life, the one that woman showed her son. And if you have time, you might find it's very lovely. It's a sweet, sweet film.
It's on my short list of movies that are worthwhile and on topic for what we're talking about this weekend. Bruce wrote 2 of them, and My Life is one. Jacob's Ladder.
Yeah, I like by the way, the Monaghan's Razor's Edge, but with Bill Murray. Did you think about that kind of spiritual movie? In a way, because
I remember not thinking it was all that good. But you know, they let Bill Murray do that movie because he was committed to do another one. I forget what the other one was that was going to make a lot of money. And at one point in Hollywood, if you were a big star, they gave you your little vanity movie to let you have that. But they're not doing that so much anymore. They're not doing that so much anymore.
Yeah, I read the book and I thought, okay, books are right back. Like, he has a certain.
Did you like it?
Yeah, I like the way he did it.
You know, it's all taste, and you know, and I just
Didn't have the flavor.
Right.
It wasn't true to the book. I'm just curious because you said there's not a lot of spiritual mind for movies being made, you know, at all, really. And
they're hard to come by. I mean, again, you have to look at movies a little differently and understand that when the boy does get the girl at the end, love alone is a kind of risky adventure and a transcendent choice. You know, you may think it's for your own pleasure, but you have to give up something to get that in the end. And that is a kind of metaphor for surrender, in a way. Almost every Hollywood movie, somebody has to let go of something in themselves in order to become the person who's willing to have or deserving to have that new thing. And so if you go to a lot of movies, you'll find that. And there's some really extraordinary ones, and theater as well. You know, there's a movie, I don't know if it's coming out soon, called Rabbit Hole. I don't want to give away the ending because it's so beautiful, but it's a spiritual movie that's really an Advaita movie. As a play, it truly is.
It's a drama. It's not that.
It's a drama. Nicole's doing it. I don't remember who else is in it, but it's a wonderful play, and I hope the movie's good. But it truly is a movie that affirms everything we're saying here.
How did it get made?
Nicole
Yeah.
Kidman.
She
She wanted to do it. She produced it. Yes.
You ever see it?
What movie do you wish you wrote?
Who I wish I wrote? Good question. 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah,
I love
I was
that.
going to suggest I was getting a Stanley Kubrick.
Wizard of Oz too. I think Wizard of Oz is one of the greatest films ever made. It has everything I've been talking about. All the rules are all in that movie. It's so perfect. Somebody else say this?
Did you ever see a movie called Dad? Jack?
I did years ago. Yeah.
And I found that movie to have a lot of spiritual themes, very moving.
I just
Just
remember-
a family.
Yes.
And a dad waking up.
More movies than not have those kinds of things. And that movie was particularly effective. And I remember, I think it was Alan Arkin crawling into bed with his father at the end.
Yeah,
Broke my heart.
exactly.
It broke my heart. There are great movies that get made, but some of them are not American. There's a movie called Edge of Heaven that came out a year ago, a Turkish movie, Turkish-German. Powerful film. I was just sobbing at the end. Edge of Heaven. Very. Yeah, not many people heard of it, and nor would you, but it was really beautiful.
I think The Wizard of Oz, Casablanca, and Gone with the Wind all came out in the same year.
1939.
Do you think? I mean, to me, those are three of the very greatest movies ever.
The Academy right now is doing a series on 1939 movies. Stagecoach. I forget all the movies, but it's like unbelievable. Everybody thinks that was the great year of Hollywood. They never had a year of better movies than that year.
Yeah. Didn't make anything at all of that, or anything?
Astrological? I don't know.
I just wondered.
I don't know.
I've been curious about that for years.
Something was going on at that moment in the storytelling realm.
Yeah.
It was right before the war.
Yeah.
These were uplifting movies in many ways. They were
Yeah.
inspiring, and they were really satisfying, and they really gave you a reason to want to live, really. They were so celebratory, these films. And maybe that's part of it. I mean, I know that our country changed dramatically right at that time.
Right.
And we're going through a rough period now, as we all know, and I think we're going to see, I hope, some movies that speak to these things. The only problem is movies today are all being made by corporations that know nothing about movies at all. All they know about is bottom line. So Universal Studios last month, a friend of mine was doing a movie there, and they canceled the movie just 2 weeks before shooting. And he said, we've been developing this for 6 years. Why have you canceled this movie? And the studio said, Universal is no longer in the drama business. They were no longer in the drama business. They can't afford to make movies that are not based on comic books, that are not comedies with whoever, Will Smith. You know, Will Smith can get any movie he wants made in Hollywood at this point in time. They say Adam Sandler can get a certain kind of movie made anytime he wants, but most movies that are dramas are not going to get made. They can't afford to make them. And so it's scary. What we need out of movies isn't going to come from the movie theaters. It will come from TV, maybe. Some great television shows, Mad Men, and there's different shows that you see that have real intelligence in them. So that's a lot more interesting television than film right now.
What about independent, like that movie, films, that movie Once?
That was
I feel
good.
like, I can't remember exactly what it was you were talking about earlier. Something, if Casablanca, the idea of like giving up this person that you're madly in love with for whatever might come next, and I felt like that movie just was like, didn't see the end coming, but like I couldn't say that I was pissed off or sad, and I couldn't say that I was happy. I was just like, oh, that's real, you know? But I wonder if there's, how do you feel about independent films, if that's maybe like a...
I love independent films. All but 3 independent companies have folded in the last year.
Really?
Studios had just kicked them out because they weren't making enough. The profit margin wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
It's really the world's changing.
Did you ever have any contact with the Dalai Lama since you came back to the States?
Once. Richard Gere had a party for him, and I went to meet him, and I was reintroduced. I reminded him of our meeting, and he did not remember me, but he looked at me and he wiped my head and he said, "Well, you must have had more hair then." That was the last of it. I love the Dalai Lama. I love His Holiness, and I love the whole school of Tibetan Buddhism. But I am not ultimately into religion. Well, thank you guys very much. Let me just say that tomorrow morning at 7:30, if anybody's awake and you're here, I'm going to give a class in this Kundalini open eye meditation. If you're interested in what that feels like, what it is like, it's interesting. If you've never done open eye meditation, it holds you to account on a certain level. It's really sort of interesting. You can't close your eyes and pretend you're meditating. You're either up and there or you're not. And it's very much a kind of energy transference, and it's worth tasting just to see what it is. I'm not telling you it's the answer to anything. I truly believe it doesn't matter what meditation form you do. I think there's great value in sitting still and watching what happens, how unstill you are when you sit still. I think that's the great teaching of meditation. And then what do you do about it? And every school has its own approach. Anyway, tomorrow morning at 7:30, and now we have dinner.